You answered the first part of a question that Kevin shared, and as you were answering, you said you went to Vegas with the MIT kids.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yeah.
So was that like part of the research? You were just like, that sounds like a
Part of
good
the research.
idea. Let's
It's funny,
go.
like, yeah, everything all the fun things in my life I can just call research. But yeah, basically, I was writing thrillers, and I had a few books they weren't any big books or anything like that, but I did have books coming out. But I was really looking for my next story, and there was a bar in Boston called Crossroads, which some of you who live in Boston might know of. It was, right on Matt's Ave. It was a sort of a dive bar that where a lot of MIT kids hang out. And I was introduced to this group of people from this woman who I'd gone to college with who was dating one of them. And she herself was on the MIT blackjack team, but I didn't know it at the time. And I got to know them, and they had all this money. It was always in cash. It was always $100 bills. And I went over the main character's house, and in his laundry was $250,000 in like banded stacks of hundreds. And his real name is Jeff Ma. And Jeff was like, telling me the stories of the MIT blackjack team. And basically, was like, you got to start coming to Vegas with us. So I started going to Vegas with them, and I would
Amazing.
go and watch them in action. I'm not great at math, and so I was more like what's called a guerrilla player, which is they just tell you what to do. They give you signals at the table, and you raise and lower your bet based on the signals. But yeah, they would go every Friday and come back every Sunday, and they had a duffel bag which would had about $1 million in it, of a mix of cash and chips, and they would fly from Boston to
Sheesh.
Vegas, and it was just like the movie 21. I mean, minus all the running around the strip and stuff, but it was you go out there and they'd go to the bathroom in the airport and hand out the money, or the chips underneath the stalls,
Wow.
and then you'd hit different casinos, and there one guy would be the big player, who would get signaled in by the other players, and it's just a really cool system. If you watch the movie 21, I think it's on Netflix now. Yeah, I think it's like in the top 10 on Netflix, which is great. A whole new generation getting to see that film. It really the blackjack part of that is all very real. That's how it worked. I mean, the teams would dress up. They'd wear costumes. They'd have different characters that they'd play. Because even though card counting's not illegal, a casino will throw you out if they catch you doing it, or worse. Back then, they used to, throw you in a back room and slap you
Mhm.
around. Now they would never do that. But it was intense, and I did it for I would go with them for a while, to the point where I got kicked out of some casinos, even though I'm horrible at it. I got kicked out of Foxwoods once
Is
in,
that because
in
you
Connecticut.
were successful that day?
It wasn't that I was successful; it was that I was hanging out with the wrong people.
Okay.
If I sat down at a blackjack table today and I bet $25 a hand, nobody would care. But if I started betting, $300 a hand, very soon someone would come out from a back room and be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, Mr. Mezrich, you're not allowed to play here." That's usually what happens, and sometimes they'll chase you out. I ran out of the Wynn Casino in Vegas once. I was with this guy. His name is Semyon Dukac. I wrote a book called Busting Vegas, which actually came out after Bringing Down the House. And this guy's amazing. He has all of these tricks he can do where he can actually, I don't know if you play blackjack, but if you're sitting at a blackjack table and after the hands are over, the dealer is going to shuffle. They roll the deck into a line, and they hand the cut card to one of the players. And Semyon could take the cut card and actually cut to exactly 100 cards from the bottom of the deck,
Wow.
something he'd practiced to the point. And it turns out that often you can see that when they roll the stack, you can see that the bottom card is like an ace. So you cut to 100 cards from the bottom, and now they take the back of the deck and they move it to the front, and now the 100th card is that ace that you saw. So what he would do is he would control the table to the point where he'd get dealt that ace. And when you get dealt an ace, you have a much higher advantage. You have a very
Wow.
good chance of winning the hand. So he had this system, it's called cutting to aces, where he'd come in with a team and they'd play tables and just cut until they got to the ace, and they'd bet $10,000 on the ace. And so it's an incredible
Jeez.
skill. And I'd watched him do it enormous. And I was sitting at a table and we were doing this, and he had been pretty brazen about it because he wanted to show me. And then he's like, we got to go. And I'm like, why? And he goes, look. And I look, and there's like two security guards coming out, and they're heading right towards us. And I'm like, oh my God, well, that's us. And we literally
That's
run
the
through the
sign.
casino, and you're terrified. You don't actually know what would happen if they got you. And nothing would happen. Who knows? But, you get out of there really fast. So, yeah, I got to see some really cool things in casinos. He had a lot of systems. He can shuffle track. His team was the king of shuffle tracking. So it turns out that in your head, you mark a group of cards So when you're watching, you play and you watch, and if you see a group of like face cards played at the same time, you can mark in your head where that is and actually watch it through the shuffle. So even though the dealer's shuffling all the cards, that group of cards stays together. And that group gives you a slight advantage. And they calculate in their head how much of an advantage they have. They raise their bets when they see the card that they marked in the last card. It's really awesome. I mean,
did this ruin Vegas for you, or did this increase the fun that you're having in
Well,
Vegas?
I'll tell you, I'm a gambler. I'm someone who's always loved gambling. I love going to Vegas. When I wrote Bringing Down the House, I actually stayed in a different hotel room every night until I finished the book. So I wrote that book over a period of 8 weeks, just staying in a different hotel suite every night, and got to know Vegas very, very well. And then when we shot the movie 21, we shot much of it in Vegas, living at the Planet Hollywood, which had just opened at the time. So I have spent a lot more time in Vegas than anyone ever should. I love gambling. I think it's great, but you're right. It does kind of ruin blackjack for you because there's just a lot of math behind it if you want to do it correctly.
Yeah.
And you know what the casino's doing to try and beat you. So I play poker now. I don't play blackjack anymore.
Go ahead, V.
So,
our head of branding, Vanessa King.
Yeah. No, I have a question about that scene which I'm like, seeing this movie happen in my head. So like, do you leave all your chips on the table when you run out? Like you up and go, or like
you don't leave your chips. You scoop your chips. You take your chips and you dump them in your pocket. The tricky part for the blackjack team was actually cashing in their chips because they ended up keeping a lot of their money in chips, and it gets very hard to cash in like $1 million in chips with people not knowing who you are. So you have to cash in very small amounts, which is really tricky. But
money laundering.
They're not really so casinos. Yeah, they're not really allowed to take your tips from you. But it has happened. So there have been teams that have gotten caught and they get back roomed. It's called. You don't want to end up in the back room because that's the place where there's no cameras. And there have been teams that have lost their chips. So it happens. But yeah, I've got lots of stories about
it's
people.
It's awesome to hear, Ben. This is fire that you're sharing this. Thanks so much.
Yeah,
for
one of my
this.
favorite. Can I tell you one of my favorite?
Yeah,
stories?
please.
One of the
going.
characters. Yes, this is kind of a different type of story. But one of the characters on the MIT blackjack team, who in the book I call Martinez, in the movie, Aaron Yu played him in the movie, I believe. And anyways, he was notorious in Vegas, but outside of Vegas, it was a double life. Nobody knew that he was a blackjack player, and he had about a bunch of friends back in Boston. And this woman was having her bachelorette party, and she's like, "Oh, I know you go to Vegas a lot. Can you set me up at a casino?" So he set her up and all of her friends with free suites at the MGM Grand, I think it was, using one of his fake personas. They had no idea he was a professional blackjack player. So they all went out there and they, had a great bachelorette party. But in the middle of the night, security came to all of their rooms and dragged all of their stuff out, took them all and back roomed this bachelorette party.
Wow.
And we're like yelling at them, "Who is Martinez?" And they had never heard of someone named Martinez because one of their security guards had figured out who it was. And so they all got kicked out of the MGM Grand, not having card counted at all, just because of their association. But anyways, I love that story.
Incredible. Wow. An awesome story. Yeah.